कि हेलो गाइस, आज की वीडियो काफ़ी अलग वीडियो होने वाली है क्योंकि आज की इस वीडियो में हम रिएक्शन देने वाले हैं शेड 17 का, जो कि पॉल विट्स ने बनाया। इनको सब्सक्राइब भी कर दे सकते हैं। अब हम शुरू करते हैं। मैं माफ़ी करता हूँ क्योंकि मैं ये सब वीडियोस में डालता हूँ वो मोबाइल पे होती है, और ये जो फेस रिएक्शन वाला कैमरे वाली में वीडियो नहीं डाल सकता, इसलिए इसकी माफ़ी करते हैं और उसको छोड़ के चलते हैं, अपनी वीडियो पे काम करते हैं। चलो अब शुरू करते हैं। मैं आगे बढ़ा लेता हूँ।
Of Sodor, off the northwest coast of England, has emerged from the fog of World War II, relatively unscathed and untouched.
The island served as a detention camp for Germans living in England. That's how
He became a prominent advisor to the ruling and went to university.
string together. But the tourists wanted to see.
Wilhelm.
Just seen it. Sawdust everywhere. It took us decoration engine, much bigger than any other engine at the time. We were terrified that fat shite would make us fire up that huge engine.
We were shocked to discover he had insisted on being able to work on the railway. So, one night, after the regular staff had finished for the day, fat some of the rail staff and I fired up the engine.
As usual, these experiments were filmed. This footage has never been broadcast before.
Dr. Ruth and I filmed it all.
It might be a bit shaky. It was handheld. At first, Gordon complained about the heat. Then that turned to pleas to douse the fire.
But that fat bastard held us back. He wanted to see what would happen.
He argued he had put a lot of work into Gordon, and the chances to get him working were too great an opportunity. He was literally cooking from the inside. By the time we were allowed to act, it was too late.
I wasn't as near to him as some of them. All I could do was run. I was lucky to get away with some singed clothes. Others weren't so lucky.
The fateful few hours following the accident would seal the fate of Sodor research.
The fat stopped us.
Legally to blame. He stopped us calling for ambulances or the fire brigade.
We told him, these are injured people here. They're going to die unless
We airlift them to hospital. Harold was banned from flying for his own safety, but we thought the risk was worth it.
fueling Harold was a nervous experience. Would he have the same reaction Mavis had?
We all breathed a sigh of relief and loaded the injured people aboard. Then it all went wrong.
Harold's engine had worked fine, but what no one realized was most of Harold's lower extremities were permanently fused to his propeller system.
As Harold's rotor blades began to spin, vital organs would be drawn into the motor and tear him apart from the inside.
Well, now there was no covering it up. The smoke could be seen all morning, but news people were here in an instant. We were told to close gates and start clearing up the mess ourselves, with some help.
Henry Thierry was the only 420 gauge engine on the island, a large engine that had been working on the railway regularly. He had become popular among tourists and the locals.
Henry was called into the yard to help tidy the mess. Working mostly at night, he would cart away the wreckage under cover of darkness.
We had to work quickly and quietly. Henry would cart wreckage from the yard away to the sea. Then one night the points were set wrong and we were diverted to another shed.
Henry had inadvertently been sent to shed number 17, where Thomas had been biofused into a tank engine and had subsequently been declared out of bounds.
It was dark and these sheds all looked the same. I unlocked the doors and Henry rolled in. I didn't see what Henry saw, because as soon as he put his head through doors, he bolted and reversed out.
Keys locked the shed up without seeing what was inside. But Henry had seen it all.
We won't even dare talk
हमें
about
इसके
that
सबूत
shed.
मिलेंगे
More
हेनरी
than
ने
our
जो
jobs were.
शेड 17
But Henry
में
had decided
देखा
to
था, उसका
speak
हमें
up
इस वीडियो
and confront
शेड
Sir
17
Topham
के
Hatt.
एंड में
That
दिखाया
night, he
जाएगा
arrived at the railway controller's office.
यानी कि कंट्रोलर
I don't know what was said in there,
Yeah,
but there
I'm
were
not
raised
Henry,
voices
the
at times.
Haram.
They had a shouting match for 10 minutes. Then Henry left, back to the
ये
shed.
ऑफिस में कैसे आ सकता
By
है
pure chance, he was sent back to the same
Yeah,
shed as
Thomas.
Thomas that night,
ये
and
छोटा
with
सा
one
ही तो छोटे
sentence,
से ये वाला
he sealed both their fates.
Henry only said one thing to him. Stay
हमें यहाँ पे
away
कोई
from shed
डिफरेंस दिख रहा है ना, ये
17.
वाला हिस्सा है ना
The next
इसका
day,
ब्लू
the
कलर
fat
का है
bastard had a new job for him.
अरे ये क्या लगा है चल इसको
The
देख
Flying Kipper route ran through the night, delivering fish from the docks to the mainland.
मैं
Across the highest altitude line in the country.
That old line was treacherous at best, but when Henry was put on there, in the middle of winter, it was a
बढ़ता जा
death
रहा
trap.
है
In 1970, fish had started being delivered by road to the mainland. It was safer and more cost-effective, and the line was declared redundant. Dangerous and unnecessary, it came as a shock to the islanders when it was reopened.
That fat shite always hated Henry. He didn't like his cheerful manner, and he clearly had other lifestyle choices when he was a human. Fat wanted Henry away from the other engines, and Kipper Run was a death sentence.
On the night of February the 8th, 1983, Henry had only been on the Kipper rung for a week. The following incident would be made into a book and later recreated in the television series.
This is the train the railwaymen call the Flying Kipper.
Can you believe they put it in a kid's story? Of course, that fat had changed quite a few of the facts.
They couldn't know the points from the main line to a siding were frozen, and the home signal should have been set at danger, but snow had forced it down.
As the train approached the most treacherous part of the line, unnoticed to Henry, his driver and firemen, the points had diverted them to the adjoining siding and right into the path of another train.
लेकिन ठोकर खाएगा 1 2 3 बड़ा धमाका क्या बड़ा एक्सप्लोजन ये तो रॉक ये कहाँ से है
Henry's driver and fireman had jumped clear before the crash.
वो तो कूद गए जब
In fact, Al and Barry died from their injuries.
Yeah.
Slowly, in snow, the poor bastards.
By midday, the recovery operation was underway and Sir Topham Hatt had arrived.
Cheer up, Henry, it wasn't your fault. Ice and snow caused the accident.
These images from a train spotter's camera were taken the evening before and were successfully covered up by the Sodor Railway Board for 10 years.
तो साल
There was a railway spike in points, blocking them.
spike
Of course, that had disappeared by the time we got there.
I'm sending you to Crewe, a fine place for sick engines.
झूठ बोला
Crew.
was this
We all knew what
direct
that
झूठ
meant.
बोल दिया
They'll give you a new shape and a larger firebox.
Crewe was, at the time, one of only 2 scrap metal yards in the UK capable of handling and recycling organic material as well as engine parts.
You'll feel a different engine and won't need special coal anymore.
With those few words, he'd sentence Henry to death.
Won't that be nice?
तोड़
Yes, sir, said Henry doubtfully.
Everyone knew he wouldn't see him
होने
again,
वाली है तो
and everything was sewn up nice and neat for that fat f***.
अब थोड़ा इसका बिल आने वाला है ये ब्लू है ये ब्लू है ये ब्लू है
As news got out about Henry's accident, it didn't take long for Thomas to realise Henry had been disposed of because of what he knew.
The next evening, Thomas had been put on his own for the night at Knapford Station. As his driver and fireman left, under what was left of his own steam, he set off for the Sodor Research Complex.
He had a small amount of burning fuel in his firebox, but he was mostly moving under his own strength. It took Thomas 3 hours to get to the complex, the effort to get there nearly killing him.
Thomas arrived at midnight. With no one around, he made his way to the shed where he was created. What he found was the answers to his questions and many others.
Since Sodor research had begun producing biofuels vehicles, the world had asked, why had the first biofusion operation worked so well, but nearly every operation since had failed? Sadly, Thomas found the reasons
अब हमें वो
inside.
चीज़ दिखने वाली जो हेड रीड है देख शिप सेफ्टी पे ये गई वो चीज़ है अभी ये तो दिखाता है ये डिब्बे सिब्बे से
Thomas had never been the first operation. He hadn't even been second.
What shed number 17 contained was evidence of several attempts to create a tank engine with Thomas's DNA. These had been early tests made by people with no experience of an experiment on this scale. Ill-planned and unprepared, these procedures had used DNA from the human Thomas and had been as much the real Thomas as the tank engine the world had come to know and love.
ये रहा एक बड़ा सा थॉमस का
To
बॉडी
us, Thomas the tank engine had been the Thomas we all
इसका
knew as
फेस
a
ही उखाड़
boy.
रखा है शायद
Part
से
of
वही
the
फेस
family
जो
the
थॉमस का
whole
वहाँ गिरा
island's
रखा था
population had
ये
known
वाला
and
फेस जो था
respected
ये वाला ये शायद
since
इसी बड़े
Wilhelm
थॉमस
first
का
arrived.
वर्जन
In actuality, this tank engine was no
ये
more the
वाला
real
थॉमस जो
Thomas
भी
than all the
घुसा था
failed
अंदर,
creations
शायद
made over
शायद
the
से ये
12
असली
months before.
है ही नहीं, क्योंकि असली
This Thomas
जो
had
है,
all the
वो
human Thomas's
हो जाता है।
memories and experiences. He had learned what Thomas had learned, known who Thomas had known, but so had all the previous failures.
अब होने वाले इस
Wilhelm and Hans Goetze had had to learn through trial and error how to bring their Thomas back from the dead. The following experiments had not had the same work put into them, resulting in the freak engines and aircraft that had developed so many problems on Sodor Island and around the world.
बुरा हुआ है
In Shed 17, Thomas wouldn't discover who he was, but in fact, who he wasn't.
इसके अंदर एक और थॉमस निकल आ सकता है जो कि कांच तोड़ देगा कांच पक्का तोड़ेगा पता नहीं कांच पांच नहीं बोलना मैं कंकाल अब आया ना एक थॉमस बाहर ठीक है हमें यहाँ दिख रहा है एक और थॉमस अब होने वाला मेन सीन थॉमस की बॉडी ही खुल गई ये सब है थॉमस के अंदर ऐसा लग सारा है ये क्या हुई थॉमस के साथ अंदर से उसकी सारी स्पाइन इसकी स्पाइन ही बाहर निकल आई और इसके बाद तो वो खतरनाक सीन आने वाला है इसका सबको इंतजार अब होने वाला है वो सीन 1 2 3 थॉमस ने अभी प्लेट यानी मुखौटा ही तोड़ के निकाल ये तो हम देख ही सकते हैं इसका थॉमस ने अपनी फेस प्लेट तोड़ के निकाल स्केलेटन निकला है
He had no idea he was only one of many clones. None of us did. But I guess as time passed, we stopped asking all the questions we had at first. We were just glad our friend was back with us. He could work for us. He became our servant in a way. Someone who drew in the crowds, helped create jobs, was eager to work. Thomas always thought of us as his friends. Sadly, over time we came to think of him as just really useful.
ये लोग समझते थे इसका काम था सीखा जा रहा था के साथ इसके बाद जैसे अंदर वाला अब खत्म होने वाला हो गया अब ये और आने वाले कुछ सीन्स आने वाले शायद से In 1983, a government inquiry was launched into Sodor in events on Sodor. Biofusion was banned the following year. कंपल्सरी वर्क बायोफ्यूजन इंजन्स को स्टार्टेड बैंड आफ्टर विंड स्केल न्यूक्लियर तो कहीं नहीं पा रहा ये है the Topham had disappeared without trace were now discovered. He would now 102 years old. इतना बूढ़ा Thomas the Tank Engine remains specialist unit where he currently undergone 23 operations. Biofusion was later banned in Europe. Sadly, in China, biofusion is still compulsory for all political prisoners.
今日會有一批水果同蔬菜抵達碼頭嘅。我要你將食物送去納福站，繼續做你自己日常嘅工作啦。
छटका दिया जाए Thank you for our reaction. इस वीडियो का अच्छा लगा तो लाइक एंड सब्सक्राइब करके जाना। Next
Next week, Cockleshell Bay in the